Good morning. Oh, good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you this Sunday. And I'm really thrilled to be here to share with you part of my story, both as you can find out, both personal and research. In 2021, the Reverend Dr. Alan Jorgensen and I spent several months listening to the stories of parents raising children with disabilities as part of a research project funded by the Dinghy Institute. Our goal was to understand their faith journeys and their spiritual care needs, and not only of parents who attended church faithfully, but also those who had left a faith community following the birth or diagnosis of their child. And using Facebook language, we reached out to parents who were, quote, in a relationship with church, but also made it really clear that we wanted to talk to people who had left church or who would describe their relationship as it's complicated. As it turned out, most parents, even those who attended church faithfully, described their relationship as complicated. As part of the interview, we asked parents to describe their relationship with church using an image. We found that by having people paint their story with a picture, we sometimes got interesting results that we didn't get when we just stuck with words. And Esther shared a really powerful story. And I'll share and I'll note that all of the names in these stories have been changed, as well as identifying details. But I'm using verbatim quotes of the parents. At first, I was pretty stunned, shared Esther, responding to the questions of how she imagined her relationship with church. But then the picture that came to mind was a big cruise ship. And I'm on the Dinghy on the side. We don't fit in. We fit outside of the ship. We've got the same logo. We can't get there in first class. Esther's story of exclusion was shared by many parents in the study. Sarah, mother of Junia, described the church as, quote, a circle of people looking inward. We're on the outside trying to tap people on the shoulder, and people are quite happy. They've got smiles on their faces and they don't have any idea of what's outside. They have no comprehension of their exclusion. Rachel told a similar story. We're on the outside. It's very hard to feel like you fit in, that you can be a part of things. Jacques described the church as requiring, quote, a membership card. And Joanna said, quote, all the doors are shut and padlocked, like you're not welcome. It's basically the image of get out. The cruise ship and Dinghy story describes many churches. For example, perhaps the front door is rammed, but once you get in, people with disabilities and their families find all sorts of barriers. The bathroom may not be big enough for a wheelchair and a support person. Pews remain in inconvenient places because of beautiful antiques, or they're suitably positioned to enjoy the view or stained glass windows, or because this is really also to take part. Coffee hour includes common allergens. Church sanctuaries echo. They might smell like old wood, and they have flickering lights, and they echo. And this is interesting because neurodivergent parishioners find this problematic and troubling. And sometimes the theology can be challenging. I've heard that all social scientific research is autobiographical. So normally in these sorts of situations, I get up and talk about research, and I sometimes locate myself with regard to the research as any good researcher would do. But today I'm going to stop talking as a researcher, because after a bit of a chat with Joe, it sounded like maybe it was time to actually just tell my story. So I consider myself a person of faith. I have a rich spiritual life. I have degrees in theology, and until quite recently taught at a seminary. I'm a member of the United Church of Canada and periodically have served on national committees. I sent my children, or at least 2 of the 3, to a faith-based high school. And I haven't regularly attended church in over a decade. I was baptized in the United Church as an infant. I grew up attending church, and I prayed, God is great and God is good for every meal. As a teenager, I was very active in my youth group, and we were a really tight group of teens. In fact, we stay in touch and we get together at least once a year to this day. We have a dinner date planned for June. I met my high school sweetheart in a church youth group, and we remain friends to this day. And while I met my husband in a driveway, the fact that we were both active members of our United Church was part of what made us compatible. As a young couple, church was the foundation of our life. Bill and I attended marriage prep. We married in the church, and when we moved to a new community, we immediately found a new church home. My husband joined the finance committee, and I taught Sunday school. We joined a young couples group, and we got together for potlucks and board games and bowling. In other words, church was the foundation not only of our faith, but the bedrock of our social world. Children were baptized and practically peed on the pews. And I love the fact that they were comfortable in the church halls, as comfortable as their home. They're around and generally get into trouble. Stories started to change when my second son. His birth was complicated for many reasons, and within hours we were both removed separately. That was my first 2 weeks of life support, life on life support, and eventually his survival was uncertain. And in those early days, our church was nothing short of food. So much food was delivered that we had to gently ask people to stop leaving casseroles on our doorstep because we had run out of freezer space and we didn't want food to go to waste. Church members ferried my husband between home and the hospital an hour away, making sure to stop at Swiss Chalet so that he would eat. I couldn't keep track of the number of people praying for us, though I know it was an international. Eventually, Matthew recovered from what the medical team called a catastrophic brain injury and was well enough to be discharged home. However, Bill and I had been told that his overall prognosis was guarded and that disabilities of some sort were expected. Cerebral palsy, profound intellectual disability, non-speaking, gastroesophageal reflux, feeding tube, seizures, breathing difficulties. The list was long and seemed to grow. Matthew cycled in and out of hospitals with growing medical concerns. We struggled to manage chronic pain that he couldn't describe and we didn't understand. His care became challenging and eventually outstripped any of the abilities to care that I might have had. With 2 other children and a husband working more than full time, I became exhausted and isolated. My life became unmanageable and chaotic. I struggled, and at first I looked to my faith and my community for support. Unfortunately, rather than being a source of strength, friendship, and solace, church became a place of confusion and pain. There were the obvious challenges, things highlighted by the research I ended up doing many years later, things we talk about all the time. The building was beautiful and old, but it wasn't particularly accessible, and the children's program, not at all. Sometimes the preaching, particularly when I got to the healing narratives and stories of medical miracles, made me feel uncomfortable. This idea that cure and faith were interconnected really confused me, especially since my son's health and my life didn't seem to change or get any better. While my church community repeatedly affirmed that God answered prayer, she seemed pretty darn silent to me. But it was coffee hour that did me in. There I heard over and over that God not only answered prayer, but that God wouldn't give me more than I could handle. That parenting Matthew would teach me so much, or that everything happened for a reason, and that God was behind all of the reasons. I cannot tell you how much I hated hearing those messages. Well, I knew they were well-intentioned. What I heard was that my prayers and my faith were inadequate, that I was failing badly, since I hadn't learned any great spiritual lessons and things weren't getting any better. God had clearly chosen the wrong woman because I wasn't special, I wasn't strong, and I really didn't want to be. What I wanted, even needed, other than my child's suffering to stop, was a safe place to share stories of confusion, pain, and lament. but I often felt those stories were unwelcome. Rather than allowing me to speak honestly at church, I felt that my community was quick to step in with an explanation. They offered silver linings and spiritual transformation and happy endings. But it took me a while to figure out that those stories that they were telling weren't for me. They were for them. For whatever reason, they needed to hear that there were these stories of redemption in the suffering of a young child and a young family. The alternative was too many people. So this was around the time I got really angry with God, and I went back to school to study theology. I realized other people have midlife crises that involve sports cars or travel or whatever. And there I learned about things like theodicies and inspiration porn. So quickly, for those who may not know, a theodicy is the things we say to ourselves or to others to sustain faith in good, benevolent, and all-powerful God, particularly in the face of tragedy and suffering. A common theodicy would be that suffering can yield great spiritual growth, transformation, and lessons. Rather than just acknowledging that sometimes life is painful and absurd, and nothing makes sense, full stop. Inspiration porn, a term coined by the late disability activist Stella Young, and I recommend her by the way, is when able-bodied people use illness and disability as a source of personal motivation and inspiration. So a common example might be a Facebook meme where you see an individual with a disability with the words underneath, "Your excuse is invalid," printed. It's when Itzhak Perlman's mobility impairment is emphasized rather than his musical genius. Inspiration porn is considered by most disabled people to be dehumanizing and degrading. It diminishes their personal accomplishments and the very real limitations and barriers they experience. I realized that during coffee hour, I was frequently the recipient of people's theodicies. Their need to tell stories to protect their sense of God, rather than allowing space to hear my lament about her parent absence. They needed to look at my visibly disabled son with his bright green wheelchair and the heating pump hanging off the back handles, and construct inspiring stories about an angelic child and Mother Teresa. The angelic child part may have been true, but I assure you the Mother Teresa part, not. I was lonely and angry and sad and desperately needed spiritual comfort and a caring community. And what I got were cliched stories and problematic theology. One Sunday, our family was invited to a picnic. We skipped church and we spent the day with friends. And over time, as a result, our attendance waned and eventually ceased altogether. I discovered instead community on a picnic blanket, church beneath the trees, communion in shared peanut butter sandwiches, and the divine everywhere, except church isn't. And despite trying, and I have tried, I haven't found my way back. I've increasingly become comfortable with the idea I might not return, which brings me back to the cruise ship and the Dinghy. Well, at various points in my life, I know I've occupied spaces on both ships. By now, I clearly identify with the Dinghy. But I also know that I'm no longer trying to float alongside the cruise ship. I've sort of gone off on my own way. What's really interesting is that the research project I was involved in, which is summarized in this cutesy little handy-dandy church book, called Beyond Saints and Superheroes, I turned the boat and my own way. And one of the things we found out in this project is that virtually all the participants who had left church, and there were many, had gone on to develop rich and rewarding spiritual lives. They read the Bible and they read devotional literature. They prayed and meditated and peeked and did yoga. Some lit wonderful special candles bearing the name of saints. One of them talked about finding contemplative and prayerful practice in knitting, which resonated for me because I knit. These families, like me, created church elsewhere and in these safe spaces nurtured their faith. So I'd like to sort of conclude with a bit of a chat about this cruise ship and Dinghy idea, because I think it's a really beautiful picture. What boat do you occupy these days? Bearing in mind that over the course of our lives, we spend time probably on both. Are you comfortable on the cruise ship enjoying dignity and fellowship, or are you isolated in wet on Dinghy. Do you want to change the picture, change the location, get rid of Dinghy altogether? Bearing in mind that change is often really hard work, particularly in the era of declining church attendance and general austerity. One of the challenges for those in the Dinghy is that change happens only as quickly as the passengers of the cruise ship allow. They often set the pace and choose. I struggle to know how to end this because I'm really bad at conclusions. I've written really long papers and I often say, I just said thousands of words like that. That's the conclusion. So today, in the absence of knowing a really meaningful conclusion to offer, I'm going to simply call us back to scripture reading and remind us all that we are called to be hospitable with ourselves and with others in a radically, gently, creative, wildly ongoing way. Thank you so much.